Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo on our continuing mission to build this Seagull Challenger. At the end of the last video we had painted the firewall with some epoxy, and now since it's all hardened up we can get on with the build. First little job, the thin epoxy really lifts the grain on the balsa, so to make sure we end up with a nice finish on the cheeks, a quick rub to take away the rough bits is a good idea. Just a very light sand, just enough to take down the lumps, but not enough to sand away all the epoxy soaked wood. The pushrod tubes need to go in too. As long as you got the formers the right way round, it's really easy to line them up. They almost fall into the right holes. Push them through until they're just not quite touching the side sheets at the back of the fuselage. Some people might open up the slots and run the tubes right through, but the alignment is good enough that there's really not much point. Pop the steel rods in, they should pop straight out of the slots. When you're happy that the tubes are nicely seated, put a drop of thick cyano on each point they run through a former. When it's nice and dry, you can pull out the push rods. Okay, what next? Finish the top hatch, I reckon. The bit under the plastic canopy needs to be coloured, but before we do that, I'm going to glue a few bits of balsa blocks around the top of the back piece. Once they're sanded to match the shape of the canopy, they'll give the canopy something to stick to. Otherwise, at some point it'll get a good knock and it will break away. For the floor, you often see where people have used covering film. Then, where it's been in and out of the sun, it ends up really wrinkled. And once the canopy is glued on, you can't really iron it back down. The other common method is to brush on some paint. Works well, but usually you end up having to use quite a bit to get a nice even coat. And that's extra weight. I tend to use an acrylic spray paint. I've masked off the area that needs painting. I'll be giving it a really thin coat of grey primer to seal up the wood, then a couple of thin coats of satin black. Well, like so. Just need to peel off all the mask, and there we go. Lovely, even finish. If you live somewhere particularly hot and sunny, a grey or even white is a good idea. The canopy really traps the heat in. With a black floor, it might just get hot enough to distort the plastic. If we pop the hatch on the fuselage, we can test fit the canopy, which is a good fit. Nice. Might as well pop the pilot in too, just to see what it looks like. This isn't the pilot that comes with the kit, this is one I've repainted. The original one with a beret really doesn't fit the model. Bit of gluing next. To make it easy to position the canopy when it's covered in glue, mark the hatch in the centre where the canopy sits front and back. Pop the canopy on and carefully centre it up. When it's bang on, mark the plastic to match the marks on the wood. Now we don't have to mess about making a mess with the glue later. Before we glue the canopy on though, the pilot needs to get stuck in. Again, it's best to mark up the position before we use any glue. When he's in just the right spot, draw around the base with a pencil. There's a few types of glue you can use for this, but I tend to use Yoo-Hoo Pour. It works as a contact adhesive and the vapours won't damage the plastics. It will soften a lot of paints though, so keep the glue on the gluing surfaces. Run a thin bead around the inside of the pilot outline and run some around the base of the pilot. You really don't need a lot, just a film. It's tempting just to stick the pilot in right away, but you'll have an easier time if you wait 10 minutes for the glue to do its thing first. When the glue's ready, pop the pilot in and press quite firmly for a couple of seconds. You should find an almost instant bond. After a few hours the glue will be quite solid, but still slightly flexible, which is ideal when gluing to a flexible object like wood. The canopy is a bit more involved. We'll need some cling film between the hatch and the fuselage, just to make sure we don't get glue where we don't want it. Pop the hatch on and fit the thumb screws a couple of turns. Now the fun bit, we need to carefully apply the Yoo-Hoo around the edge of the canopy. It sticks to this stuff extremely well. If you apply too slowly, the glue will form a skin, and you'll end up trailing little strings of the stuff. If you get one of the strings on the inside of the canopy, you will probably never get it off, so be really careful. As before, both surfaces need some Yoo-Hoo, so run some around the hatch too. Again, try not to get any on the nice hatch floor, then you get a 10-minute break to let your nerves calm down. This is one of those bits you really only get one shot at. Carefully lay the canopy on the hatch, making sure the marks we made line up perfectly. Keep some pressure on the canopy and work it around a little bit to make sure it's nicely settled. Now, well, leave it overnight. You can use some rubber bands to keep some pressure on it, but be careful. If you have any pull on the bands, the canopy can creep position. So if you do use bands, keep checking it's still in the right place. And there we go, nice and solid, fits perfectly, nice. Next up, some prep for the covering phase. The covering material doesn't make much difference if it's monocoat, solar film or some other. None of them really like to stick to plastic. But luckily, solar film do a product called balsa lock, which is basically a heat-activated glue you can paint on. No prizes for guessing what we're going to do with it. Yep, carefully go around the outside of the canopy where the covering film will want to go. Like the Yoo-hoo, don't get it where you don't want it. If you're really worried, you can use some masking tape. While we've got the balsa lock out, we need to paint some over the epoxy on the fuselage. Without it, the film will pretend to stick, but will peel the first time you look away. Balsa lock takes a little while to dry. Once it's gone transparent, it will be close enough. Well, now we've got this far, we might as well fit all the big bits and see if we need to do anything special to balance the airframe. Tail wheel first, which comes pre-assembled. When we do the final bit, the grub screws will want a bit of Loctite, but it's going to come off again when we put the covering on, so we might as well leave it dry for now. It's attached to the tail with 2 screws. Hold the assembly central over the ply plate of the tail. Try and get the hinge point of the assembly in line with the rudder hinges. Then mark one of the holes, drill it to fit the screws, 1.5mm if I remember correctly. Fit the assembly and do the screw up just snug. Make sure it's straight and mark up the second hole. Swing it out the way and drill the hole. Swing the assembly back and fit the second screw. When it comes off again, it would be a good idea to drop some thin sino into the wood to harden up around the threads. The main undercarriage is fitted with 3 M4 screws into the T-nuts we fitted earlier. There was a slight misalignment, but with a bit of perseverance the screws lined up. Not great, but good enough. The stub axles are quite nice. 2 large washers, 2 nuts and 2 collets. We want one of the nuts at the end of the threads where the smooth end is. Since the stubs won't need to come off again, we might as well Loctite them while we're at it. So pop a drop on the thread and spin the nut into position. Now we need a washer. The thread goes through the undercarriage, then another washer, some more Loctite and the other nut. Grab the nuts with a pair of spanners or parallel jawed pliers and do them up nice and tight. Now I found the wheels didn't fit the stubs. The hole was a little bit undersized. Running it through with a drill cleared them though. One of the collets goes on next. The collets are really there to space the wheels from the spats. Since I'm not using the spats, I could do without the inner collet. Would be a little less stress on a heavy landing, but I'll fit both for now. Saves on losing one. Not too surprisingly, the wheel and the second collet can go on too. Oh, and the other stub and wheel need to go on the other side. Flip the model over and the engine can mount up with its 4 screws. Like before, don't do them up tight, just enough so it won't fall off. Might as well fit the exhaust, as that will make quite a big difference to the balance. We need to fit a prop and spinner. I'm using a Graupner 11x6, but the prop you end up with depends on the engine or motor you fit. And to finish off, I'll stick one of these cheapo spinners on. Okay, fuel tank. The kit comes with one, but I'll be running with a Dubro. The tank's got all the bits inside, so its weight should be about right. The tail surfaces can slot in too. They're going to make a huge difference to the balance. The steel pushrods can slide in. And lastly, the canopy can go on. Right, the centre of gravity wants to be 60mm from the leading edge according to the manual, and more often than not the manuals are close enough to get started with. But it's always a good idea to search the forums, as from time to time the manufacturers get it wildly wrong. And it turns out that 60mm is pretty much right in the centre of the wing mounting tab holes. Nice. Right now it's very nose heavy. When the wings are on it will move back a little bit, but nowhere near what it needs. Because we've left the receiver battery out so far, we can use it to get it somewhere near and see if we need to do anything special. It's just a bog standard 5-cell AA pack from Overlander. Going to try it behind the servos first, inside the fuselage. Really tail heavy, so we don't need to make a hatch for it in the tail. Let's try it in front of the servos. A bit nose heavy now. Okay, how about under the servos? Perfect. With the wings on, the battery will end up moving forward, but it will be in the main area of the fuselage. Lovely. We don't need to do anything special with it until the final fit, which for me makes a change. I normally end up with an engine that's far too heavy and end up with tail mounted servos and a battery somewhere back there too. Right then, that'll do for this week. All the basic construction done now. Next on the list is covering. So that will be fun to film. I might have to resort to highlights there. Okay, thanks for watching. Do please hit that like button if you liked. And if you're not already, do please subscribe. Bye guys.